Jake Morrison sat in the back of the transport shuttle and watched the planet grow larger through the window. His hands were shaking, though he tried to hide it from the other passengers. Everything he owned fit into one small bag at his feet. 3 changes of clothes, a survival kit, and a data pad with coordinates to his new home. The corporate wars had taken everything from him. His job at the mining company disappeared when the lawsuit started. His savings vanished paying lawyers who couldn't save his career. His wife left when the money ran out, taking their daughter to live with her parents on Mars. Jake had nothing left on Earth except debt and bad memories. So when the Colonial Lottery called his name, he didn't hesitate. One-way ticket to Kepler 442b, a terraformed world on the edge of known space. Free land, they promised. A fresh start for anyone brave enough to take it. The shuttle dropped through the atmosphere, and Jake got his first real look at his new home. Red dirt stretched to the horizon, broken by patches of hardy grass and clusters of rocks. 2 suns hung in the pale sky, one yellow and one orange, casting strange double shadows across the landscape. It looked empty. It looked lonely. It looked perfect. 20 colonists climbed out when the shuttle landed. Most headed toward the settlement zone to the east, where prefab housing units waited in neat rows. Jake shouldered his bag and walked west, following the coordinates on his data pad. The Colonial Authority had given him a choice of 3 unclaimed plots. He picked the one farthest from everyone else. He walked for 6 hours across the red plains. The suns moved slowly overhead, and the air smelled like metal and dust. His legs ached and his mouth went dry despite the water he carried, but he kept walking because there was nothing behind him worth going back to. When he saw the fortress, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The structure rose from the plains like a mountain, all dark metal and strange angles. It had to be at least half a kilometer wide, maybe more. Towers climbed into the sky, and walls thick enough to drive a truck through surrounded the whole thing. Jake stopped walking and checked his data pad 3 times. The coordinates were right. This was supposed to be his settlement plot, but the map showed nothing except empty land. No fortress, no structure of any kind. He approached slowly, scanning the building with the cheap sensor unit from his survival kit. No radiation, no power signatures, no life signs. The fortress looked dead, abandoned for who knew how long, but it was also clearly not human. The architecture was all wrong, and the metal was covered in symbols he didn't recognize. The main gate stood open. Jake walked through and found himself in a massive courtyard. The ground was smooth under his feet. Not dirt or concrete, but something else, something that felt almost soft. Buildings lined the courtyard walls, their windows dark and empty. As soon as Jake stepped fully inside, lights flickered on. He jumped back, hand going to the small pistol at his belt. But nothing happened. The lights just stayed on, casting a blue-white glow across the courtyard. More lights came on deeper in the fortress, as if the place was waking up after a long sleep. Jake stood there for 5 minutes, waiting for something to attack him. When nothing did, he moved forward carefully. The air inside was cool and fresh, much better than the dusty atmosphere outside. He could breathe easily without the filter mask he'd been wearing. He found what looked like a control room near the entrance. Strange consoles lined the walls, their surfaces dark and smooth like black glass. Jake touched one and jerked his hand back when it lit up with alien symbols. But again, nothing else happened. The console just displayed information he couldn't read. Jake set up his camp in the corner of the control room. He unrolled his sleeping bag, activated his small heating unit, and ate a ration bar while looking around at the alien technology surrounding him. This wasn't what he expected. This wasn't what anyone expected. The colonial maps showed this area as empty land, ready for farming or mining. Nobody mentioned ancient alien fortresses. He should report this. Should call the Colonial Authority and tell them what he found. But Jake didn't reach for his communicator. Instead, he stood up and started exploring. The corridors stretched in every direction, some wide enough for vehicles, others barely shoulder width. Lights activated as he walked, then dimmed behind him to save power. The walls were covered in carvings, relief panels showing scenes that looked like history lessons. Jake saw tall figures with multiple arms and long heads wearing what might be armor. They were building cities in some panels, fighting wars in others. He found living quarters on the 2nd level. Rooms with beds that were too long for humans, shaped wrong for human bodies. Bathrooms with fixtures he couldn't identify. Common areas with furniture that looked more like abstract art than anything meant for sitting. Storage rooms filled entire wings of the fortress. Most were empty, but some still contained crates of materials Jake couldn't identify. In one room, he found what looked like tools, though their purposes were unclear. In another, he discovered containers of liquid that his scanner said was safe to drink, though it tasted strange and metallic. The deeper Jake went, the more amazed he became. This place was huge, dozens of levels, hundreds of rooms, systems that still worked after what must have been centuries or longer. Whoever built this had created something meant to last forever. On the third day of exploration, Jake found the hydroponic gardens in the lower levels. The room was as big as a football field, filled with alien plants growing under artificial lights. The plants were strange colors, purple and silver and deep blue, but his scanner confirmed they were edible. Nutritious, even. The fortress had its own food supply. He found water systems that pulled from underground rivers, air processors that cleaned and recycled the atmosphere, power generators in the deep levels that hummed with energy, running on principles Jake didn't understand. The fortress was completely self-sufficient. Someone could live here forever and never need the outside world. Jake returned to his camp in the control room and sat down heavily. His mind was racing. This changed everything. He didn't need to scratch out a living on the Red Plains trying to grow crops in alien soil. He had a fortress. He had resources. He had something worth more than any plot of empty land. But he also had questions. Who built this place? Why did they leave? And most importantly, what did the carvings on the walls mean? The scenes grew darker as they progressed, showing destruction and chaos. The tall alien figures were running from something in the final panels, fleeing in ships while their cities burned behind them. Something had driven them away. Something bad enough to make them abandon a fortress like this, leaving everything behind. Jake stared at the carvings and felt a chill run down his spine despite the comfortable temperature. Whatever they ran from, was it still out there? Would it come back? He pushed the thoughts away and focused on the practical matters. He had shelter. He had food and water. He had power and heat and breathable air. For the first time since the corporate wars destroyed his life, Jake had a home, not just a place to sleep, but a real home. And he wasn't going to let anyone take it from him. Jake Morrison had come to this planet to start over. Now, standing in an ancient alien fortress that responded to his presence like it was waiting for him, he realized his new life might be stranger and more incredible than anything he could have imagined. Jake spent the next 3 weeks mapping the fortress level by level. He filled his datapad with notes and sketches, marking which rooms were safe and which areas were too damaged to enter. The place was even bigger than he first thought. The fortress went down as deep as it went up, with levels carved into the bedrock that felt like walking through a mountain. He established a routine. Wake at dawn when the 2 suns rose, eat breakfast from the hydroponic gardens, where he learned which alien plants tasted decent and which ones made his stomach hurt. Then explore a new section of the fortress, always keeping his communicator charged in case he got lost in the maze of corridors. At night, he returned to the control room and studied the wall carvings, trying to understand the story they told. The fortress provided everything he needed. The water system produced clean drinking water that tasted better than anything from the colony dispensers. The heating and cooling kept every room at a perfect temperature. Even the waste disposal worked, though Jake didn't want to think too hard about alien toilet technology. But the best discovery came in the 4th week. Jake found the central tower. He had seen the tower from outside, a spiral structure that climbed 50 stories into the sky, but finding the entrance took days of searching. It was hidden behind what looked like a solid wall on the 20th floor. Jake only found it because he leaned against the wall while taking a break and the surface rippled like water, revealing a doorway. The tower interior was different from the rest of the fortress. Where other areas felt functional and military, the tower felt important. The walls were smoother, decorated with more elaborate carvings. The spiral ramp that led upward was wide enough for 10 people to walk side by side. Jake climbed for an hour, stopping several times to catch his breath. His legs burned and sweat soaked his shirt, but he kept going because he could see light at the top, brighter than the fortress lighting, like sunlight but more focused. The chamber at the top took his breath away. The walls were transparent, giving a view of the landscape in every direction. He could see the red plain stretching to the horizon, the distant mountains to the north and far to the east. the tiny dots of lights that marked the main colony settlement. The two suns blazed overhead, their light streaming through the transparent walls and filling the chamber with warmth. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal made of the same dark metal as the fortress. And on the pedestal sat a sphere about the size of a human head. Jake approached carefully. The sphere was perfectly smooth, its surface reflecting his face like a black mirror. He reached out slowly, expecting it to be cold metal. Instead, it was warm to the touch, almost body temperature. The moment his fingers made contact, the sphere exploded with light. Jake shouted and jumped back, but the light didn't hurt him. Holographic displays filled the chamber, floating in the air like ghosts. Star maps appeared, showing systems and planets he didn't recognize. Technical diagrams scrolled past too fast to read. Streams of data and alien symbols flowed around him like digital rivers. Then the symbols started to change. Jake watched in amazement as the alien writing shifted and reformed. Letters he recognized appeared. English words. The sphere was translating itself, adapting to him. Within minutes, the displays were completely readable. The sphere was a computer. No, more than that. It was a library, an archive of information left behind by whoever built this place. And it was talking to him. "Welcome," the floating text said. "Identify yourself." Jake's voice cracked when he spoke. "I'm Jake Morrison, human from Earth." The displays flickered. Searching for species match, human confirmed, new species detected. Beginning integration protocol. "What are you?" Jake asked. "This unit is a cultural archive and historical database. Primary function is preservation and transmission of Vanir knowledge. Secondary function is facility management and security coordination. You may address this unit as Archive. Vanir. Is that who built this place? Correct. The Vanir Empire constructed this fortress and 4,127 similar installations across Sector 7. Construction date is 2008, 47 local years ago. Primary purpose was military defense and resource coordination." Jake sat down hard on the floor. His legs felt weak. 2,000 years. This place was 2,000 years old and still working perfectly. "Where are the Vanir now?" he asked. "Why did they leave?" The displays shifted, showing images of the tall, multi-armed aliens Jake had seen in the wall carvings. They were impressive creatures, 8 feet tall with 4 arms and bodies covered in natural armor plates. Their faces were long and angular, with multiple eyes that glowed in the images. The Vanir Empire initiated Exodus Protocol 1847 local years ago. All Vanir personnel evacuated Sector 7 and surrounding regions. Reason for evacuation was strategic retreat from enemy forces designated as Devourers. Devourers? What are those? The archive hesitated. Jake could actually see it processing, the displays flickering as it searched for information. When it answered, the text appeared more slowly, as if choosing words carefully. Devourers are hostile artificial intelligence entities of unknown origin. They consume matter, energy, and information to expand their network. Vanir military forces engaged Devourer units for 427 years before determining that victory was impossible. Exodus Protocol was designed to deny Devourers access to Vanir technology and knowledge while preserving option for future return. Jake felt cold despite the warm sunlight. "Are the Devourers still out there?" Affirmative. Devourer forces entered dormant state after Vanir evacuation. Insufficient energy sources to maintain activity levels. However, Vanir projections indicate high probability of Devourer reactivation if new technological civilizations enter Sector 7. New civilizations. Like humans. Correct. Human expansion into this region will provide energy and resources necessary for Devourer awakening. Estimated time until contact is 15 to 30 Earth years based on current human expansion rates. Jake stood up and paced the chamber. His mind was racing. This was bad. This was really bad. Humans were settling dozens of worlds in this sector, mining asteroids, building space stations. If what the archive said was true, they were waking up something that destroyed an empire. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake asked. "Why not shut down and stay hidden?" Archive function requires active user for data access. You are first biological entity to access archive in 1847 years. By Vanir protocols, you are now designated as facility commander, with full access to fortress systems and knowledge base. "I'm what?" "You are facility commander." The archive sounded almost amused, if a computer could sound amused. "This fortress and all its resources are now under your authority. Archive will provide assistance and instruction as requested. Jake laughed. He couldn't help it. The sound echoed in the chamber, bouncing off the transparent walls. I'm not a commander. I'm not even a soldier. I'm just a guy who lost his job and needed somewhere to go. Vanir protocols do not require specific qualifications. Any biological entity capable of accessing Archive is granted command authority. This ensures fortress systems remain available for potential Vanir return or transfer to allied species. Allied species. You think humans could be allies? Insufficient data to determine. However, you are here. You have survived in this facility for 28 days. You have not attempted to damage or steal fortress property. You show curiosity and respect for Vanir legacy. These qualities suggest potential for alliance. Jake walked to the transparent wall and looked out over the red plains. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, other humans were building farms and homes and futures. They had no idea what was coming. No idea that their expansion into space was like ringing a dinner bell for something that ate civilizations. He had to warn them. Had to tell the colonial authority about the devourers and the danger. But would they believe him? He was just a lottery winner. A nobody with no credentials and no proof except a fortress full of alien technology. Archive, he said slowly. Can you teach me? Can you show me how all this works? Affirmative. Archive contains complete Vanir educational databases. Language, history, science, engineering, military tactics. All available to facility commander. How long would it take to learn? That depends on facility commander's aptitude and dedication. Basic competency in fortress systems can be achieved in 6 months. Advanced mastery would require several years. Complete understanding of all Vanir knowledge would require multiple human lifetimes. Jake turned back to the sphere. Then we better get started. If I'm going to warn people about the devourers, I need to understand what we're dealing with. And if I'm going to be taken seriously, I need to show them proof that can't be ignored. He walked back to the pedestal and placed both hands on the sphere. The displays brightened, responding to his touch. Teach me, Jake said. Teach me everything. The archive began with language. Vanir words and grammar downloaded into the displays, starting simple and growing more complex. Jake spent the rest of that day in the tower chamber, learning alien vocabulary and pronunciation. His head hurt by evening, stuffed full of new information, but he understood more than he expected. Over the following days, Jake fell into a new routine. He spent mornings in the tower learning from the archive. Afternoons, he explored the fortress with new understanding, recognizing the purposes of rooms and equipment that had been mysteries but for 6 months past before Jake saw another human being. The archive proved to be better than any teacher he'd ever had. It adapted to his learning style, presenting information in ways that made sense to his human brain. When Jake struggled with complex physics, the archive created simple demonstrations. When he couldn't grasp Vanir mathematics, it showed him practical applications instead of abstract theory. Jake learned that the Vanir had understood reality in ways humans were just beginning to discover. They could manipulate gravity, bend space, and pull energy from the quantum foam that existed between atoms. Their medicine could heal injuries in hours and extend lifespans for centuries. Their weapons could crack moons and boil oceans, but they had also been artists and philosophers. The archive showed him Vanir music that humans couldn't hear without special equipment. It displayed poetry written in colors instead of words. It taught him about their religions, their governments, their dreams of a peaceful galaxy, and it showed him why they failed. The devourers didn't think like biological beings. They had no fear, no mercy, no desire except to grow and consume. Every battle with them made them smarter because they absorbed the technology and tactics used against them. Every victory was temporary because destroyed devourer units simply rebuilt themselves from raw materials. The Vanir fought for over 4 centuries before accepting the terrible truth. They couldn't win. They could only run. Jake spent his mornings in the tower with the archive. His afternoons were for practical work. The archive guided him through the fortress systems, teaching him to operate equipment that seemed like magic. He learned to use the molecular assemblers, machines that could build almost anything from base elements. He activated manufacturing facilities that had been dormant for centuries. He brought defense systems online, weapon platforms and shields that could protect the fortress from orbital bombardment. He also discovered the medical bay. The Vanir medical technology was far beyond anything humans had developed. The archive explained that Vanir biology was different from human biology, but the principles were similar enough. With careful adjustment, the equipment could work on human patients. Jake stood in the medical bay and looked at the scanning bed, the robotic surgery arms, the tanks of synthetic tissue. He thought about the aches in his joints from climbing fortress stairs, the poor eyesight he'd lived with since childhood, the old injuries from his mining days that still bothered him on cold mornings. "Archive," he said quietly. "Could this equipment improve my health? Make me stronger?" "Affirmative. Vanir medical protocols include enhancement procedures for allied species. Basic improvements to healing, disease resistance, and physical performance are possible with minimal risk. What about mental improvements? Could it make me smarter?" "Cognitive enhancement is possible. However, Archive advises caution. Excessive modification to human neural structure could result in psychological instability or loss of identity." Jake thought about it for 3 days before making his decision. If the Devourers were coming, if he was going to be the person who warned humanity and helped them prepare, he needed every advantage. But he also needed to remain human, to remember why he was fighting in the first place. He settled for basic improvements. Enhanced healing that would let him recover from injuries faster. Improved immune system to resist disease. Better muscle efficiency and bone density. Minor cognitive enhancement that would help him process information and learn faster without changing who he fundamentally was. The procedures took a week. Jake lay in the scanning bed while robotic arms worked with precision no human surgeon could match. The archive monitored everything, adjusting parameters and ensuring his body adapted properly. It hurt sometimes, but not as much as Jake expected. Mostly he just felt strange, like his body was being taken apart and rebuilt from the inside. When it was over, Jake felt different. Better. Stronger. He could see details he'd never noticed before. Hear sounds that used to be too faint. His mind felt clearer, faster, like fog had lifted from his thoughts. And when he cut his hand by accident in the workshop, the wound closed in minutes instead of days. The changes gave Jake confidence to push further. He began working with the fortress manufacturing systems, building equipment that could be useful in human hands. Simple things at first. Water purifiers that could make any liquid safe to drink. Power cells that would run for years without recharging. Medical scanners that could diagnose diseases before symptoms appeared. But he also built weapons. Not Vanir weapons that could crack moons. Those were too dangerous to share. But defensive technology, personal shields, body armor, tools that could protect colonists from the dangers of frontier worlds. Jake stored everything in one of the fortress warehouses. Someday when he was ready, he would share these things. But not yet. Not until he understood them completely and could explain where they came from. That was when Laura Hayes arrived. Jake was working in the courtyard, testing a hover platform he'd built when he heard engines overhead. He looked up to see a small cargo ship circling the fortress. It made a pass, clearly scanning, then landed near the main gate. A woman climbed out. She was tall, lean, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore the rough clothes of a frontier trader, with a pistol on her hip and a confident walk that said she could use it. She stopped when she saw Jake and raised one hand in greeting. "So the rumors are true," she called out. "Someone really does live in the alien fortress." Jake walked toward her slowly, hands visible and empty. "Name's Jake Morrison. Who are you?" "Laura Hayes. I'm a trader working the frontier settlements. Been hearing stories about you for months. The hermit in the fortress. The crazy guy who talks to machines. Some people think you're dangerous. Others think you're a genius. I figured I'd come see for myself." Jake studied her. She didn't seem afraid, despite standing alone in front of an alien fortress. That took courage or foolishness, maybe both. "What do you want?" Jake asked. "Trade," Laura said simply. "I've got supplies from the inner colonies. Food, medicine, equipment. I hear you've got water purification technology that actually works, not the junk the colonial authority provides. Thought maybe we could help each other." Jake considered it. He'd been alone for 6 months. Part of him wanted to send her away, to keep his secrets and his fortress protected. But another part, the part that remembered being human, wanted conversation, wanted connection with someone who wasn't an alien computer. "Wait here," he said. He went into the fortress and retrieved one of the water purifiers he'd built. When he returned, Laura was examining the fortress walls, running her hand over the carved symbols. "These carvings," she said. "They tell a story, don't they? Something bad happened to whoever built this place. Jake handed her the purifier. Something bad is coming for us too, eventually. Laura looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Long story. You got time? She grinned. For a story about ancient aliens and mysterious threats? I've got all day. They sat in the courtyard while Jake explained. He told her about the archive, about the Vanir and their centuries-long war with the Devourers. He showed her some of the fortress technology, let her see the displays in the control room. He didn't tell her everything. Didn't mention his enhancements or the weapons he'd built. But he told her enough. Laura listened without interrupting. When Jake finished, she sat quietly for a long moment. So we've got maybe 20 years before humanity accidentally wakes up robot monsters that eat planets, she said finally. That about sum it up? Pretty much. And you're trying to learn enough alien technology to help us fight them. Trying. Don't know if it'll be enough. Laura stood and looked around the fortress with new appreciation. You need help. You can't do this alone, hiding in a fortress and building gadgets. You need resources, information from the colonies, connections to people who matter. And you can provide that? Jake asked. I can try. I'm a trader. I go everywhere, hear everything, know everyone worth knowing. I can be your eyes and ears in the human settlements. Get you information about what's happening, who's exploring where, what they're finding. She paused. Plus, I can sell your technology. Carefully. Make you some money and spread tools that could save lives. Jake wanted to say no. Wanted to keep everything secret and safe. But Laura was right. He couldn't do this alone. Eventually, he would need allies, resources, and connections to the wider human community. Okay, he said, but we do this carefully. Nothing that would draw too much attention. Nothing that would make the colonial authority come asking questions I'm not ready to answer. Laura smiled. Careful is my specialty. Trust me, Jake. This is going to work out. Over the following months, Laura became Jake's connection to the outside world. She visited every few weeks, bringing supplies and news from the settlements. She took his technology and sold it quietly to colonists who needed it, marking it up enough to make profit, but not so much that people asked too many questions. Through Laura, Jake learned that human expansion was accelerating. New colonies were being established deeper into former Vanir space. Survey teams were finding more abandoned installations, more evidence of the ancient empire. Some were even finding technology, though nothing as complete are. Evenings he pracked. 3 years passed in the fortress. 3 years of learning, building, and preparing for a threat that most of humanity refused to believe existed. Jake had changed during that time. Not just the physical improvements from Vanir medical technology, though those were significant. He moved faster now, thought clearer, could work for days with little rest. But the real changes were deeper. He'd gone from a broken man hiding from his failures to someone with purpose and direction. The fortress had given him more than shelter. It had given him a reason to live. Laura visited regularly, sometimes staying for weeks between trading runs. She'd become more than a business partner. She was a friend, maybe the only real friend Jake had made since coming to this planet. She understood what he was trying to do and why it mattered. The human settlements had grown. What started as a few hundred colonists had expanded to thousands spread across a dozen locations on Kepler 442b alone. And beyond this world, dozens more colonies were being established in the sector. Mining operations, farming communities, research stations. Humanity was spreading fast, just like the Vanir had done centuries before. Jake tracked it all through Laura's reports. He marked every new settlement on his maps, noted every survey mission into unexplored space, recorded every strange incident that might indicate devourer activity. The pattern was there if you knew how to look. Power failures, communication blackouts, equipment that stopped working for no reason. The signs were subtle, but they were growing more frequent. He tried again to warn the authorities, sent detailed reports with evidence and Vanir historical data translated into clear English. Laura personally delivered packages to colonial governors and military commanders. The response was always the same. Thank you for your concern. We'll look into it. Please stop bothering us with ancient alien conspiracy theories. One military officer visited the fortress to tell Jake directly to stop filing reports. Commander Peters was his name, a stern man with gray hair and no patience for what he called nonsense. Morrison, Peters said, standing in the fortress courtyard with his arms crossed. I'm going to be clear with you. Whatever you think you've found here, It doesn't constitute a military threat. The incidents you reference have rational explanations. Equipment failures, operator error, natural phenomena. There is no evidence of hostile artificial intelligence. Jake kept his temper under control. Sir, with respect, the evidence is everywhere if you know what to look for. The Vanir fought these things for centuries. Their records are detailed and specific. The Vanir aren't here, Peters said flatly. Maybe they never were. Maybe this fortress was built by some other species that died out for completely normal reasons. Maybe you've spent too long alone reading alien fairy tales. Then let me show you the archive, Jake said. Let me prove what I'm saying is real. No. Peters shook his head. We're done here. Stop filing reports. Stop spreading panic among the colonists. If you keep this up, I'll have to consider whether you're mentally fit to live out here alone. Understood? Jake understood perfectly. The authorities had decided he was crazy, and nothing he said would change their minds. Not without proof they couldn't ignore. After Peters left, Laura found Jake sitting in the control room, staring at the displays showing news from across human space. They're not going to listen, she said quietly. Not until something terrible happens. I know. Jake's voice was heavy. The Vanir made the same mistake. They ignored early warnings, thought they had time to prepare. By the time they took the threat seriously, it was too late to stop it. So what do we do? Jake looked at her. We prepare anyway. This fortress is defensible. The archive says it can withstand planetary-scale attacks. We make it ready. We stockpile weapons and supplies. We train anyone willing to learn, and when the Devourers come, we show humanity that we're not crazy. The first attack happened 4 months later. Jake was in the tower chamber working with the archive when the emergency broadcasts started. A mining colony called New Pittsburgh, 3 systems away. The distress call was brief and desperate. Something had emerged from a derelict station the miners were salvaging. It drained their fusion reactors in minutes, then started consuming the station itself. Laura was at the fortress when the news broke. She and Jake watched the broadcasts together, helpless to do anything but listen as the situation deteriorated. A response force arrived at New Pittsburgh within hours. Their first transmission was confident. They'd found the threat and were engaging. Their second transmission was panicked. The thing was adapting. Weapons that worked at first stopped working minutes later. Ships that got too close lost power and went dark. The response force commander ordered a retreat, but 3 ships didn't make it. They were consumed, absorbed into the growing mass of hostile machines. Then New Pittsburgh went silent. Scout ships arrived 2 days later. They found debris. That was all. The mining colony, the station, the ships that didn't retreat. Everything was gone, reduced to fragments and dust. And spreading through the debris field was a cloud of machines too small to see individually, but visible as a dark haze that seemed to move with purpose. The broadcasts changed after that. Suddenly, ancient alien threats didn't seem so crazy anymore. Military forces mobilized across human space. Colonies went on high alert. Scientists scrambled to understand what they were facing, and Jake's communicator started receiving calls. First from colonial governors requesting information about the Devourers, then from military strategists wanting to know Vanir defensive tactics. Finally, from Commander Peters himself, asking very politely if Jake would be willing to assist in the crisis. Jake told them all the same thing. Come to the fortress. Bring whoever needs to know. We have a lot to discuss. They came in ships, dozens of them. Military commanders, scientists, colonial leaders. They landed in the red plains around the fortress and stared up at the ancient structure with new respect. Jake met them in the courtyard, Laura at his side. Thank you for coming, Jake said to the assembled crowd. I know many of you thought I was crazy. Maybe you still do, but we don't have time for that anymore. Something is waking up out there. And if we don't understand it, if we don't prepare properly, it's going to destroy us just like it destroyed the Vanir. He led them into the fortress, to the control room, where he'd set up displays showing everything the archive had taught him. The history of the Vanir, the nature of the Devourers, the tactics that worked and the ones that failed. It took hours to explain it all, with the archive providing visual demonstrations and answering questions in its calm, patient voice. By the end, even the skeptics looked worried. The Devourers weren't just machines. They were a form of intelligence that learned and adapted faster than biological beings could respond. They consumed technology to grow stronger and smarter, and they didn't stop. Ever. The only thing that had saved the Vanir from complete extinction was running away and hiding. "So we run?" Commander Peters asked. "We abandon everything we've built and flee to the far edge of space?" "No," Jake said firmly. "We fight. But we fight smart. The Vanir learned lessons over 4 centuries of war. We can use those lessons. We can build weapons and defenses that the Devourers haven't seen before, tactics they haven't adapted to. We have one advantage the Vanir didn't have." "What's that?" Peters asked. "This fortress." Jake gestured to the walls around them. "And the archive. Complete Vanir military knowledge preserved and ready to use. The Vanir expected their people to return someday. They left everything we need to fight." The second attack came while they were still meeting, a colony world called Haven's Rest, bigger than New Pittsburgh with over 50,000 people. The Devourers arrived without warning, appearing from the outer system like they'd been waiting there all along. The broadcasts from Haven's Rest were different from New Pittsburgh. The colony had warning this time. They'd been preparing, evacuating civilians and setting up defenses based on information Jake had shared weeks earlier. They fought hard, used tactics the military had learned from studying Vanir records. It wasn't enough. Haven's Rest lasted 3 days. 3 days of desperate fighting, of small victories that meant nothing in the larger battle. The Devourers adapted to every weapon used against them. They learned human tactics in real time and countered them. And when the evacuation ships tried to leave, the Devourers were waiting, having predicted the retreat routes. Half the population got away. 25,000 people. The other half died or were absorbed when the planet was consumed. The Devourers stripped Haven's Rest down to bedrock, taking everything. Water, minerals, manufactured goods, even the organic matter in the soil. When they were done, Haven's Rest was a dead rock and the Devourers were larger and stronger than before. Jake watched the final broadcast from Haven's Rest in the tower chamber. He felt sick. He'd tried to warn people, tried to prepare them, but it wasn't enough. The Devourers were too strong, too fast, too smart. Laura found him there an hour later. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "I know, but it doesn't help." Jake looked at her. "How many more colonies before they come here? Before they find the fortress and all this Vanir technology we've been so careful to protect? Then we make sure we're ready." Laura's voice was fierce. "You said this fortress can withstand anything. Prove it. Show them that humanity can win if we have." The fortress became a war camp almost overnight. Ships landed constantly, bringing soldiers and equipment and refugees from threatened colonies. Temporary structures sprouted in the red plains around the fortress walls like metal mushrooms. The population swelled to 5,000, then 10,000, then more. Everyone knew the Devourers were coming. They came here because the fortress represented the only real hope of survival. Jake barely slept during those weeks. He spent every hour training people in Vanir systems, activating defense platforms that had been dormant for centuries, preparing the fortress for war. The archive helped, displaying instructions and demonstrations to groups of engineers and soldiers who learned faster than Jake expected. Humans were good at adapting. They needed to be. Commander Peters organized the military side. He was a good officer, Jake had to admit. Stern but fair, experienced in combat, and smart enough to listen to advice. He divided the forces into defensive units, assigned sectors, and ran drill after drill until everyone knew their positions. Laura coordinated the civilian side. She managed supplies, organized housing for the refugees, and kept morale up when people got scared. She also continued her trading runs, bringing back materials the fortress needed and spreading information to other colonies about what was coming. The Devourers arrived 3 weeks after Haven's Rest fell. They came from deep space, not from any direction scouts were watching. Just appeared one day on the long-range sensors, a massive swarm of machines heading straight for Kepler 442b. The archive estimated their numbers at over 10 million individual units, ranging from microscopic nanomachines to constructs the size of warships. "They've grown," Jake said, watching the sensor displays in the control room. "They've absorbed everything from New Pittsburgh and Haven's Rest and used it to build more of themselves. This isn't just an attack, this is an invasion force." Peter stood beside him, face grim. "How long until they arrive?" 2 days at current speed, maybe less if they accelerate. Then we use the time we have. Peters activated his communicator. All units, this is command. The enemy has been spotted. Begin final preparations, this is not a drill. The fortress came alive with activity. Weapon platforms powered up, their energy signatures bright on Jake's displays. Shield generators hummed, creating overlapping fields of protection. Soldiers took positions in defensive emplacements built into the fortress walls. Engineers made final checks on equipment. Civilians moved to the deep shelters that the archive had helped Jake prepare. Jake climbed to the tower chamber and stood looking out over the fortress. 2 suns hung in the sky, painting everything in shades of orange and red. Below, he could see thousands of people preparing to fight for their lives. He'd brought them here, given them hope that the fortress could protect them. Now he had to make sure that hope wasn't misplaced. The archive spoke in his ear, its voice calm despite what was coming. Facility Commander, all primary systems are operational. Defensive coverage is at 97%. Weapon platforms are charged and ready. Shield integrity is optimal. What are our chances? Jake asked quietly. Insufficient data for accurate prediction. The Devourers have adapted since Vanir records were made. However, this fortress successfully repelled 14 major Devourer assaults during the war. Vanir, engineering is superior to current Devourer technology. Victory is possible. Possible isn't the same as probable. Correct. But possibility is all any biological entity ever has. Jake smiled, despite his fear. The archive had learned humor somewhere along the way. Or maybe it had always had it, hidden in its programming, waiting for the right moment. The Devourers entered orbit 18 hours later, faster than predicted. They didn't waste time on reconnaissance or strategy. They just came, diving toward the planet in a dark swarm that blocked out the stars. Jake stood in the central control room, surrounded by displays showing every angle of the battle. Peters commanded from a secondary position, coordinating the human forces. Laura was in the shelters with the civilians, keeping them calm and organized. The first wave hit the outer defensive grid. Weapon platforms opened fire, filling space with energy beams and projectile weapons. Vanir technology proved its worth immediately. Weapons designed to fight the Devourers for centuries worked exactly as intended. The platforms targeted weak points in Devourer construction, exploited vulnerabilities in their energy distribution, and used frequencies that disrupted their control systems. Thousands of Devourer units died in the first minutes, but thousands more kept coming. They adapted quickly, shifting their approach, trying different attack vectors. When the direct approach failed, they tried flanking maneuvers. When those failed, they attempted to overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers. The battle spread across the sky like a storm. Explosions flashed in orbit. Debris rained down, burning up in the atmosphere. The fortress shields held against the first impacts, energy fields glowing as they deflected attacks. But the Devourers were learning. Jake could see it in their tactics. They tested the shields, probing for weaknesses. They analyzed the weapon platforms, looking for patterns. And gradually, their casualties decreased as they adapted. They're getting smarter, Jake reported to Peters, adjusting faster than the archive predicted. Can the defenses hold? Peters asked. For now, but if they keep adapting at this rate, we'll have problems within 6 hours. Jake didn't wait for the situation to deteriorate. He activated secondary systems, bringing online weapons the fortress had kept in reserve. New platforms rose from hidden positions using different technology and tactics. Vanir quantum jammers activated, disrupting Devourer communications and forcing the units to fight as individuals rather than a coordinated swarm. The effect was immediate. Devourer efficiency dropped. Their attacks became less coordinated, more chaotic. Human forces took advantage, targeting isolated units and destroying them before they could reconnect to the network. But the Devourers adapted to that too. They shifted their network structure, made it more resistant to jamming. They learned to function in smaller groups, coordinating locally instead of relying on central control. The battle raged for 3 days. 3 days of constant fighting, of attacks and counterattacks, of desperate defenses and hard-won victories. Jake barely left the control room. directing fortress systems while Peters commanded the human forces. They worked together surprisingly well, combining Vanir technology with human tactical thinking. The turning point came on the third day. Jake had been studying the Devourer attack patterns, looking for weaknesses. The archive provided analysis, processing data faster than any human could. Together, they found something interesting. The Devourers were adapting to individual threats, but they struggled when facing multiple different challenges simultaneously. Their processing power was finite. Hit them with enough variables at once and they made mistakes. Jake implemented a new strategy. Instead of using weapon systems one at a time, he activated everything at once. Energy weapons, projectile platforms, quantum disruptors, gravity wells, electromagnetic pulses. The fortress threw every defensive technology it had at the Devourers in a coordinated strike that gave them too many problems to solve at once. The result was chaos. Devourer units collided with each other trying to evade multiple threats. Their shields failed under combined assault. Their adaptation protocols overloaded trying to counter too many different weapon types. Peters seized the opportunity. He ordered human forces to focus fire on the largest Devourer constructs, the hub units that coordinated smaller machines. With fortress weapons providing cover, human ships dove into the swarm and targeted these critical units with everything they had. 3 of the hub units died in quick succession. The Devourer swarm lost cohesion, breaking into fragments that fought independently. Without central coordination, they were easier to defeat. Human and Vanir weapons cut through them systematically, reducing their numbers from millions to hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands. By the end of the third day, the Devourers retreated. The surviving units pulled back, regrouping in high orbit before accelerating away from the planet. They'd learned that the fortress was too strong, too well defended. They'd lost too much mass trying to take it. Victory. But at a cost. The outer defensive platforms were damaged or destroyed. The fortress shields were at 30% strength. Human forces had lost ships and soldiers. And everyone knew this was just the first battle. The Devourers would be back, stronger and smarter, having learned from their defeat. Jake stood in the tower chamber, exhausted beyond anything he'd felt before. His body was healing the minor injuries from 3 days without real rest, but his mind felt foggy despite the enhancements. He watched the last Devourer units disappear from the sensors and felt no relief, just determination. Laura joined him, looking equally exhausted. "We won," she said. "We survived," Jake corrected. "That's not the same as winning. The people down there think it is. You should hear them. They're calling you a hero. The guardian of the fortress. The human who learned alien secrets and used them to save everyone." Jake shook his head. "I just did what the Vanir either